Today we're going to have an awesome conversation with Sarah Superbad Adams, Dave Boon Benton. We're going to talk all things domestic terrorism, how to keep officers safe, your community safe, how to train to make sure that you don't become a victim of a domestic terrorist attack. Stay tuned and check out this awesome conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Sarah Adams and Dave Boon Benton. That's not enough of an intro, so I'm going to read an intro about them. So we got Sarah Superbad Adams. She's a former CIA targeting officer who hunted terrorists across war zones, exposed Benghazi truths in her book, Know Thy Enemy, and warns daily about homeland attacks on her podcast, The Watch Floor. Very good podcast. I like it.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say it's better or worse than Sean Ryan's because maybe one day I'll be able to talk to him. And right alongside her, we have Dave Boon Benton, the Marine Scout sniper turned CIA GRS contractor who held a line at Benghazi Annex under fire. It was immortalized in the movie 13 Hours. Very good movie. Pissed a lot of people off. Together, they've co-authored The Deep Dive, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, Brief First Responders, and Keep Sounding Alarms on Evolving Threats like Al-Qaeda Cells, Swatting Ops, The Intel Gaps Putting Local Cops in the Crosshairs. Sarah and Boon, thank you and welcome for being on a podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
I just saw your guys' podcast that Sarah was on, and I watched all of the new stuff you've been dropping since Iran, and obviously that's the new hot topic. But here, because we're talking to our local law enforcement officers, about 1,900 plus members and their families in Pinellas County, and hopefully this podcast spreads and reach out further. I wanted to focus just on local issues that we're having, gaps in training, gaps in information sharing, the failure points that we have as local law enforcement. I don't think we're going to talk about anything that puts local law enforcement in danger. Obviously, that's not our job or what we want to do here, but I think highlighting where we're failing is good because they can then get motivated enough to train themselves and get on board and get squared away to make sure that they themselves or their community that they work in doesn't become a target. So I got probably about 10 questions. I'm going to bounce back and forth between the two of you. At any time, feel free to interrupt me, and I'm sure we'll get off on some tangents, but we'll get started. So Sarah, you've been calling swatting domestic terrorism. You said that it weaponizes law enforcement, putting officers and innocents at risk by mimicking terrorist tactics. From your targeting experience, how do these play out like pre-attack setups that you've seen overseas, and what immediate protocol tweaks do you think could help agencies and the departments avoid getting played like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple issues involved. Obviously, someone can get harmed in the event, but the other thing is you also can have a case where a terrorist group is doing it as the pre-attack surveillance, because a lot of these terrorists that came into this country, like the biggest chunks came around 2022 and 2023. Now, people think they come here and sleep. They don't come here and sleep. They case, they do surveillance, they build bombs, etc. So anything like that, they're learning from it, even if it is someone who did it just nefarious, and maybe they did it against a political candidate, maybe like a congressional member in this district, and they do it. Well, then the terrorists still can watch what happened and learn from it. So we also don't want to aid our enemies and show them tactics. One of the things we've learned is they've spent a lot of time watching law enforcement's response. So anytime they can learn more about how you respond, what it looks like, how the movements come together, the better it aids them. So that's one thing I fear. But also, as you can imagine, when you just allow stuff like this to occur, it is really lawlessness. It is putting people in harm's way. I mean, think if you're just a young family, how scary something like this is. So it is terrorism at a local level. So I think that's a huge problem. Now, one thing we like to make clear to law enforcement is you need to know who lives in your community, because a lot of the people being swatted are like activists or influencers or politicians. And why did you find out that day that they live in that house? You should be ahead of that and know who's in your area, especially we just talked about Iranians. So if you have Iranian activists living in your county, you should know that, because obviously the Iranian regime knows they live in your county, and that could bring a threat you never planned for, especially that there are fears some assassinations against some of these activists. They've even been putting bounties out on them in the last couple of weeks. So again, it's like people don't want to talk terrorism, but so many things benefit terrorism. And if you allow things to not be dealt with, other people take advantage of what they learn from them.
You just said a whole bunch of stuff that I never even, would have thought about. Especially, I would have thought about the influencers and your locally elected, folks that live in your neighborhood. But Iranians, not bad Iranians, or
The good ones.
The good ones, the ones that the regime may want to target because they're speaking against Iran and the Ayatollah and everybody else. But that's a huge target. And like you said, the Iranians know for sure where their people are, and we have no clue or no idea. I think that's huge. I think that's something definitely that those intel guys within our local agencies should definitely pay more attention to and share that information. It would be great that if in St. Pete one of those people are identified and St. Pete police knows about it, but Pinellas County Sheriff has no idea that that person lives in St. Pete. It's within the same county. It should definitely be an information sharing for sure. So Boon, building on that, Benghazi showed how bad actors exploit chaos and response delays. As someone who defended the annex under sustained attack, what ground level signs should patrol officers watch for in potential SWAT or terrorist call to stay one step ahead to protect themselves, their families, and their communities?
I think kind of like what Sarah said, it's just knowing your environment, who's in my environment, and then because of that, what potential hazards could be in that environment. So it's just really understanding, hey, who's who in the zoo? Who are the players? Who are the threats? Having an understanding of that is really what they should be looking for. You can't really prepare for every scenario and look for every little thing, but just having an understanding of your environment, having that good situational, spatial, environmental awareness will help you manage threats that you can't really anticipate.
Yeah, and what you always bring up that doesn't go against our training, but a lot of agencies don't specifically train this. We have 12 to 13 agencies under the Suncoast PBA, and not everyone trains that same way. I remember you talking about, I think both of you talking about, more than one person being a threat within that area, multiple people engaged in a threat or multiple simultaneous threats. We saw it in Iraq when I was deployed there. We had an IED, and we had secondary device or tertiary device, and now we got small arms fire going on. Knowing your environment, knowing your hotbed areas, knowing the areas where a lot of people congregate, and knowing how to patrol those areas and how to deal with an issue if it happens there, I think is absolutely huge. Sarah, on your podcast, The Watch Floor, you detail Al-Qaeda's involving plots since 2021. Multi-cell operations, aviation threats, urban assaults slipping through borders. For our street-level officers, your everyday patrol officer who doesn't get these high-end briefings or doesn't know really much about terrorists. They just know about their local speeders in their community or the local dope dealer. What overlooked indicators like surveillance, recruitment patterns tie into local law enforcement? What should they spot before it hits home?
Yeah, well, first, just talking like targeting wise, it's really interesting because as you can imagine, terrorists, when they train on targets, right? And so we know some of the targets they trained on. So they trained on like shopping centers, right? So that should be important. They trained on like religious institutions. So we're talking about churches, synagogues, of course. So that matters. They trained on like hospitals. They trained on public transportation, like the city bus type of thing. So those are all local level issues people need to pay attention to because there's reasons terrorists choose those for targets because it's where you live, work, and play, and it impacts everybody. It's almost like why some people, unfortunately, attack a school. Everyone feels impacted if a child is hurt. So terrorists want to do the same thing, and they want a community to feel a shared impact. So that's one thing I like to make clear about the targeting. The other thing we've learned in the training camps is they've changed up a lot, and they do a lot of training in 5 to 10 man teams. And so when they're going to do these attacks, and a really great example was recently in Baluchistan, Pakistan, they did maybe like 30 attacks over the course of like 40 hours. Now, like you said, you saw in Iraq, they would do like a suicide bombing, then they would come in with the gunmen. Well, that's how they're training for now in the West. So another thing we like to tell people is you need to be doing your drills or even your tabletops for multiple things. And the weird part is, if you even look at Columbine, it had IEDs and 2 gunmen, but we trained school shooters with 1 gunman. It's like, if that is what we started from, why are we at least not doing an IED and 2 gunmen? So it's just almost like we forgot some of the lessons just from the beginning. So we always tell people, put in another shooter, maybe add an IED, have it happen at 2 locations if you're going to do a drill in your town, because it really gets you thinking. If you watch now when it changes, you'll see, so everybody's used to one active shooter. So they take out the active shooter in the drill and everybody relaxes and celebrate. The second one comes in and then they're in a really, really bad spot. And the terrorists know this. They know how we do things. They know how we train. And so they're planning around that, which is really interesting. Another thing I like to talk about, because people don't take lessons learned from October 7th enough, and I think it's a huge failure because the terrorists co-trained. So these Hamas terrorists co-trained with terrorists that came here. So one thing is, when they were doing the attacks in Israel, they are phased. Now they had law enforcement targets in the phases, and they were in different ways. So in some cases, they hit like the police station in phase 1, right? Very simple. You plan it, you ambush a police station so they can't respond. Another thing they did that was really smart is they surveilled the police in advance, and then when they went to respond, they hit them in the second phase as they're leaving and coming down the road and ambush them. So think of what this felt like if you're a citizen there and you're like, where's the police? Why isn't the police showing up? Well, they got hit in the first and second wave, and they're now not coming to save you. And the terrorists like that thought and the fear behind no one's coming.
For sure. No, that's the reason it's terrifying, and terrorism. It's exactly what's going to happen when you get ambushed at, we had a place in Samar, Iraq called a CMOC, and we were supposed to go out on a patrol with our infantry unit or our mortar platoon. They would see us, because they have eyes everywhere, they'd see us loading up and getting ready to go on a convoy escort, on a mission into somewhere in Samara. They would start mortaring us right there, and we don't even get to go on a mission.
Right.
We're now picking up the issues that's happening there. You said something that interests me, tabletops. We did it in the military. I'm sure you guys did it a million times. It's something that I think is super helpful, especially if it's different agencies, partner agencies.
Exactly.
Not only your local, but your mid-level, your federal guys, your JTTF guys, if they can get their heads out of their fourth point of contact and put egos aside and have this group, a buddy of ours, I call him a buddy, friend. I know you know him, Danny Alvarez. He was trying to put legislation forward this year to try to get a task force implemented and embedded in the FDLE to do this type of thing. A lot of people are talking about, this is a spy network and all this other stuff. I get the people who don't trust government. I understand that. I get that if you have no idea and you think that this is a perfect world we live in, that kind of scares you, because it looks scary and it sounds scary, and like, why do we need a group to look into everything? But man, the ability that group would have to start information sharing from the state level on down to its local law enforcement officers, by just driving to their agency and saying, hey, we need 3 guys in your intel unit for all of Pinellas County to meet here at the multi-purpose room, and we're going to do a brief monthly, we're going to do a brief weekly, bi-weekly, whatever the case may be. I think that's a huge suck vacuum that we have right now that's not happening. I think they're hoarders of information sometimes, whoever they are, right? Whoever has it keeps it. Here locally, we do a good job with spreading that information, but statewide, I doubt it. I doubt they have that information and they're spreading it.
Just to jump on that, something else for law enforcement, which we encounter a lot, is you were talking about the state filtering things down, but it's also the local level filtering things up. And a lot of the information happens on the local level, and you might not have the complete picture until you send it up. And then someone with a broader view looks at it and they're like, oh, wait a minute, that's what's actually going on there. Yeah. So we actually encourage a lot of agencies, develop a capability on the local level and then send it up. Don't always rely on the federal level or the state level to send something down to you.
It's like a puzzle piece, right? Like you have your Pinellas County puzzle piece, and that puzzle piece is great. It looks nice. You have it, but if you don't share it with the overall picture, you can't see what the overall picture is. Exactly. You may get stuck in your little, well, this is Pinellas County. I think we are, first responders, right? We respond to things. And I would really like the proactivity to get put back into, our job profession instead of just responding to this. You don't want to respond to a terrorist attack. You want to be able to stop it before one happens. The damage that can be done, the terrorizing effect that it has in your community, the lives lost, the law enforcement impact. it's huge. And if we can be on the front end of stopping these things with people like yourselves, like you said, local going up and federal coming down or state coming down, that'll be huge.
Yeah, one thing I like to say too on a local level, if you're not getting ahead of this, because you're the one that sees things local, like FBI isn't going to know there's a guy, running this store that everybody has issues with, and even the people from that country are going in there and saying he's extreme. That's local level gossip. Like, you're the only one who's going to get that. But if you're not ahead of it and something happens where you are and you say, oh, we've never looked into this threat, or we've never done anything, or we've never thought about it, think of that, what it looks like to the local citizens. Yeah, because they're like, wait, you're here to protect us, and you don't even know there's terrorist casing in this town. I mean, Tampa's a great example. There are so many people still who don't know that the attacker from New Orleans cased Tampa. Like, how do we not know that? And that's a problem. What did he case? What did he look at? What was he focused on? What were the interest areas? Because that then gets sent to ISIS, and now other terrorists are looking at his casing. So I think we are also, just those little pieces, we're really missing them by not sharing and communicating and then looking at something the way the enemy does.
Yeah, and this area, correct me if I'm wrong, is a hotbed because it's a huge veteran community. I heard you mention that they would like to hit veterans, those responsible for what they feel was, an attack or a loss in their community, wherever they're from. We have CENTCOM.
Yep.
Right there. What are you seeing on every TikTok, on every Instagram reel, on every press briefing right now? Is CENTCOM. So they know more, I believe, the terrorists and the organizations that are planning terrorist attacks, or those who hate us in America. They know more about our politics and about our procedures and about our TTPs than we do. Yeah, they're better studied than we are. And
yeah, and I just want to bring that up quickly. If we're talking about someone who was a senior leader in CENTCOM or SOCOM, or even like someone outspoken, obviously we have like a Rob O'Neill who was involved in Bin Laden. The terrorists have been monitoring these people for years. So for any of those people in your local community to think, oh, well, they don't pay attention to me, they know exactly where you live, they know where your kids go to school, like, that's the level of detail they're casing. And they spend a lot of time starting online first. There's a lot of people who don't take any digital hygiene seriously, or they don't explain it to their kids or their significant other, like, hey, there are bad guys watching us. I know it sounds crazy, but it's happening, and we're giving them this information for free. So it is something also people need to spend a little time on. I know a lot of people call it counterintelligence, but I just like the idea of digital hygiene. Protect yourself.
I want to talk more about that. That's a great point. For a while, we spent a lot of time in this organization, in the union, and at several of the agencies to follow up on our information that's public. People went to reverse phone lookup, and there's a little tab. If you scroll way down, a tiny letter saying, I'd like to be removed from this, and you either have to send an email or send a copy of your creds to say, remove me from this. There was a time where like everybody wanted to do that. It was probably like 2020, the riots and all that stuff. People were getting targeted for being cops. We had people getting stuff vandalized because they had cruisers in their yards. I tell my wife all the time, sorry, babe, don't post pictures. You know what I mean? Yes, I do have a billboard out there because I have a cruiser that just sits in my driveway. But don't post pictures of the house, or don't let the numbers, the address be on there. Or let's try to hide as much as possible. Unfortunately, we do drive billboards to say police or sheriff or whatever on them. But how would, if you have any organizations, groups that you vetted, that you trust, plug them. What organizations can help an officer do that digital hygiene and help hide as much as we can? Yes, they have to take their own initiative. Let me stop posting every one of my kids and family members and homes and houses, and I'm going on vacation this week, i.e. my house will be empty. What can they do? What programs can they search to help them with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some simple things like you just can go to Google and get your house blurred out. That's the simplest thing to do. And in your case, you just say I'm law enforcement. You don't even need anything. Another thing nobody thinks about is your house is on realtor.com most likely with pictures inside of it. So because you're law enforcement and have threats against you, you can reach out and have like MLS take down the photos inside your house. That's very important, right? Because if someone's targeting you, now they already know the whole inside layout of your house. So it's something not thought of. And again, a regular citizen doesn't need to worry about this, but for law enforcement, I do think you should do this. Then there's just simple things like when you pay in payment apps, some of them show all your contacts. So you have to go in and lock all that down and make sure it's private. Like, people don't realize that's in there because they think, oh, you could only get the people I paid. No, you sucked in all your contacts and it's in there. So just anything like that, you just lock it down. And then there are paid for services. I don't promote any, but I do use one. So I use one called Opteri. And so I just pay a monthly fee, and it goes online and scrubs for my info and then puts out those requests for me to take them down. So if you are a little more concerned, you can take the next step. But obviously, as you know, just try not to make the personal stuff public, or make a separate page, right? So if you have your Facebook page from high school and it's all your friends, fine. But now make a second page, and that's what you do business-wise or to people who you aren't close to. That's where you talk a little bit more about work stuff, and then you just keep your personal separate.
Yeah, just keep your intermediate family and very close friends.
Exactly.
That you know aren't terrorists.
Exactly.
Going a little deeper, if you are going to share, obviously you can set your accounts to private, like Sarah's saying, but also if you do post pictures, let's say you go to Disney with the family, don't post those pictures while you're at Disney. Don't make yourself time and place predictable. Yeah. Also, if you do take pictures, take the metadata off, because there is a lot of information, right? Location, time, date. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't like pictures of children. I know people like to share them. So it's really funny. When we did our Benghazi book, there is a picture of a terrorist holding a child, and it's the only picture we could find of him. So I was like, we have to use this picture. So we black out the eyes, and then I had a friend that was former CIA. He's like, no, you have to also like blur the teeth. Like, you can use the teeth for photo recommendation in a smiling picture. So I didn't even know that. So then I blurred out this baby's teeth, but it's like, it's almost like not even worth the risk of putting your children out there. And there's so many things now being used with these photos that are really inappropriate, and you just don't want that to happen. I just found out recently, my assistant, she was actually my producer on my podcast, they literally took her picture and they made like inappropriate sites with her likeness. And it was on Instagram, of all things. So just crazy.
Like AI dubbed her photo and did things with it?
Yes.
Oh, no.
And inappropriate stuff. I mean, crazy. So you don't think of those things through, but I mean, it's so common. I even like the idea of just making an AI picture of yourself, because then they can't scan those features out that they need to. Yeah. And it's so, there's a tool that every tool does it now.
It's crazy. You know, as much as we want technology to advance and, you know, we want the next newest and coolest thing, the stuff that it's capable of is terrifying sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, Boon, from your sniper defender view in Benghazi, how do those same networks, patience and blending tactics translate to domestic risk today? What practical training fix, like better threat verification or small unit coordination, that departments could implement to close those gaps so they don't drop the ball?
Now you're opening up a Pandora's box of institutional training. So just talking about institutional training when it comes to law enforcement, you're always going to battle time and budget. Yep. And there's no way around that. But as leaders, we can be creative. Like, you have a military background. You walk into the barracks, what are the Joes doing? They're laying around. Smoking and joking. Right. Oh, we don't have money for this. We can't lock on a range. But can you grab 4 of your buddies and go do react contact drills in the courtyard? Yes, you can. Law enforcement is no different. Yeah. Can you guys meet at a Starbucks? Obviously, you know, when you have a break in service of calls, and just what if something? Mm-hmm. What if downtown St. Pete had this issue? How are we going to respond to that? And that's part of training. It doesn't cost you anything but time. Yeah. Institutionally, we need to change the culture in law enforcement training, especially when it comes to high liability, hard skill training. I'm not sure about Florida. When I went through the police academy in Georgia, 500 hours of training. And then 20 hours a year to maintain your certification. 20 hours a year. The whole year. That is nothing. Yeah. I think a barber needs more continuing education to stay certified than a law enforcement officer. Yeah. And that's lacking, and it's telling. And with law enforcement, it is a hard job, and there's so many things you have to be competent on, and then there's priorities. Well, firearms training isn't popular. You know, let's not do that. Let's do diversity or something like that. Completely necessary. Yeah. You need to be well-rounded. But when it comes to the hard skills, we have to change the culture to where that's a priority. The money's there, it's just misallocated. We have to find it. So we have to get creative. And a lot of it doesn't cost money, it's just time and initiative. But the big ones are defensive tactics and control. The higher level our officers have of being able to control someone without hurting them, we decrease liability. We decrease on the job injuries and long-term health benefits and payouts. Same thing with firearms. The more skill they have in being able to use that firearm, the less likely they'll have to employ that firearm.
Man, it's like you sat in on a couple meetings that we've had. So my senior vice president, Mike Ward, high-ranking jiu-jitsu black belt. We push defensive tactics like crazy. We started our own jiu-jitsu club at the police department to where we can have these young officers come in, usually young officers come in, and just maintain that level of training. I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner. I absolutely love it. I would argue and say that it is the most important thing when it comes to your day-to-day operation as a police officer. I've been a law enforcement officer for 19 years. I'm a canine guy. We usually track felony suspects. We always track homicide suspects, rape, suspects. You name it. We're out there tracking them. Bad people. I pull my firearm all the time. I train like crazy with my firearm. But you know what I do more than anything? Is put hands on people. I touch people. Because if I got to put you in handcuffs, I have to physically touch you. What happens if somebody shrugs away or somebody tries to shoot a double leg on you? Are you going to know how to handle that? And I argue and say jiu-jitsu is, like what you said, the best martial art and the best discipline to be able to control somebody and not hurt them. My buddy, Mike Ward, the senior vice president, can get somebody inside control and hold him there and manipulate his radio and call for backup and get people there without hurting the person because he's just that good. Right. Not a little fella. So he's got that on his side too. I'm a little bit smaller, so to hold a big guy inside control is going to be a while. But to get somebody in mount and get your hooks in and hold that person down or get a Kimura grip or whatever you can do to wait till the cavalry shows up is huge. I think it would reduce officers' injuries. I think it would reduce injuries to the citizens. I think that it would be a healthier thing, both mentally healthy and physically healthy for our law enforcement officers, because once you start doing it, you get addicted to it. You love it. When you realize, I can control people pretty good. I had a kid, probably 2018. He was doing vehicle burglaries. He's on a bicycle. He steps off the bike. I fire up my dog, so my dog starts barking. I let him know, if you run, you're going to have to deal with that. So he straddles the bike, and we're talking, and I'm going to go ahead and put him in handcuffs. So I tell him, step off the bike. He steps off the bike, and I see him do a quick glance, down at my legs, and I was like, I don't think this kid's going to run, because if he runs, I'm just going to hit this door popper, and he's going to have to deal with 85 pounds of psycho that's back there. He tries to shoot a double leg. He's a high school wrestler. Kid shoots a double leg. I sprawl. We bounce his head off the ground. He bounces his own head off the ground. And I get him in handcuffs. I control him. I get on the radio. Hey, I got one resistance. Send me units. He's under control. I got to put him in handcuffs. 90% of these officers only do defensive tactics training in the academy. Now, our agency is good in making sure that we do some defensive tactics training, time, money, everything else goes into effect with how often we can do it. But I know people in years past who got out after 32 years of service. The only defensive tactics they ever did was in the academy.
Right.
And that's just mind-boggling to me. The number one thing you do, other than talking to people, is touching people. Mm-hmm. And they don't practice or train on it. Just like firearms. I'm a firearms instructor. I won't say names, but I see people come in to qualify, and I can tell that person has not touched that firearm since the last qualification. And that's terrifying. One, because my life may depend on how good and skilled you are and confident and competent you are in the use of your firearm, but you're sending out things that are gonna go somewhere.
Right.
And if they don't go into your target, they're gonna hit something, someone, and that's terrifying to see. So, again, like you said, you're never gonna be able to always create more time or more budget, but to prioritize those things, I think, is huge. Prioritize the self-defense training, the defensive tactics training, the firearms training. Like you said, run drills. Dry drills are great. It's 3-4 man team drills. Your squad on an extra day go to a vacant, building and just run drills. I think.
To bring up 4 points, because I could talk about this all day, but I won't. So, to your point of officers having problems on the state qualification course, that's a qualification course. That is not training. There is a difference. And if they're struggling with the state qualification course, they need a lot of remedial training. Going back to the jiu-jitsu, grappling, something that you said that you recognize a target indicator or a pre-attack indicator when he glanced down and looked at your legs. Because of your grappling experience and obviously your time on the job, you knew he wasn't running because of the dog, but you immediately recognized, hey, I'm about to be assaulted. A lot of officers are ambushed because they miss those pre-attack cues. And that was probably, I'm assuming, because of your jiu-jitsu background. Another one, which we don't like to talk about, because we're supposed to be tough guys. So burnout, mental fatigue, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Law enforcement is a very stressful job. How do you unwind? How do you cope with the things you see and the stress of the job? Jiu-jitsu or physical activity. That's a very good way to do it. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
Absolutely. Man, we can talk. I'm sure we'll ad-lib a little here at the end about mental health stuff, where this organization is huge on it. Unfortunately, we've had in the last 18 months 2 sergeants commit suicide at the agency that I work for. We just had one in Hillsborough County last week commit suicide. I think today was his church procession, led it to the funeral site. But it's horrible. And like you said, jiu-jitsu, not only with just knowing that you're doing better for yourself and that you can help better protect yourself and others that work for you, but the camaraderie that builds as well. Jiu-jitsu is, to me, like another small unit of people, of like mind who want to do better for themselves. And jiu-jitsu is not always fun. I love it. I think it's great, but getting hammered and pressed by the big dude who's, has got long hair and he's drips of sweat hitting you in the face, you're like, oh my God. But that type of training, I think, keeps you mentally healthy and definitely physically better. So, Sarah, Benghazi intel failures left teams exposed, and that's obvious. We've seen that everywhere. Echoing today's ignored FBI warnings on homeland plots, how unprepared do you see most local departments for terrorism-style incidents right now? And what's one underrated skill, like situational awareness or all-source intel use, that could save badges in mass attack scenarios?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is, we brought it up earlier in the show, is not a lot is actually being pushed down from federal government to state to local. And then even when we have seen it, we now have this director of NCTC, and he has a different view. He's like, I want to get stuff unclassified to give to law enforcement and push it down. And in September, he put out, I don't know if you guys have a copy of it, but it was Al-Qaeda's threat to the homeland, and it was that they're looking at doing homeland attacks here. And the crazy part is, it was put out, by the DNI, and it got pushed to local fusion centers, and a lot of them did not share it with local law enforcement. And then a lot of times FBI came in and countered them and said, this isn't real, this is clickbait. So they're actually undercutting another federal agency trying to push it to local law enforcement. So we've seen this to be this constant internal struggle, even within the federal government, of organizations fighting each other. So we've gotten to the point, it's like you almost have to just set them aside, let them fight their battles, and then we see what can we do, what is the most useful. And so one of the things we like to talk about is, as I brought up before, understand what the terrorists are even looking at, what they're focusing on, what the threats look like, but also the most basic things. Terrorists, if you don't think of them as a gun, you have to think of them as they are just normal people. What do normal people have to do? They have to travel. They have to rent houses. They have identification documents. They have jobs. They go buy groceries. Now, in that process, what can we find out? So one of the major things is, a lot of these terrorists came in illegally over the southern border. Now, they came in illegally and then they assumed another identity, right? This is very famous. Like, a lot of Iranians came in and they had Venezuelan passports. Now, if you have good relationships with Iranians in your community and they run into a guy with a Venezuelan passport and they're like, no, that guy was Iranian, they can say that. But if you don't start having those discussions with people, another great example is we have a lot of people on Afghan passports who aren't Afghan. We have a lot of people on Turkish passports who aren't Turkish, a lot of people on Syrian passports who aren't Syrians. Our Libyans left Libya after our attacks, but they gave Libyan passports also to Tunisians, to Germans. So the interesting thing is there is so much on a local level if you understand how the terrorists are doing their administrative stuff. Like, what do their safe houses look like? They have strict rules, right? You have to have one way in and one way out, right? So you already have a unit that has 2 different entrances. They have weird things like it can't overlook a pool. Women and children aren't allowed to come into a safe house, you know? So once you start learning some of these and then you push these lessons learned or these understandings to the community, at least if people see something, they can be like, this is similar. Or you hear from a guy who owns a grocery store and he's like, yeah, this guy comes in all the time. He has Afghan documentation, but he's definitely an Egyptian. You know, it won't sound crazy when someone tells you that, but unless we're training people on all these little things, it's not going to be noticed. And remember, this isn't just terrorism. There's people who came into this country and they do money laundering. They do human trafficking. They're in all the underworld criminal activities. You don't want any of them in their community. So we need to find anybody who's kind of like living this double life under these different identities, because they are a threat in your community no matter if their background's narco stuff or terrorism.
Yeah. No, and human trafficking obviously is a massive issue that we're having, and Florida is bad in it as well. Something you mentioned in the beginning of that statement was the federal agencies not sharing that information appropriately and or undercutting that. Without going into, the tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists, QAnon stuff, which some of it's come out to be true. Why is that? Why would a federal agency release that information to a state agency, and the intention is to disseminate that, but then another federal agency comes in and blocks it? I don't want to say or think that it's malice or ill intention, but is it politics, or is it that the what do they call them? The special agent in charge doesn't like the way that it's being put out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's like bravado, ego. Maybe some of these individuals in the administration don't get along. They have different opinions and different assessments, and they also have different priorities. Some don't want terrorism as a priority. They want the cartels as a priority, and there is a lot of fighting between that. But sometimes people believe something. A really good example is Osama bin Laden, right? So there's famous Maya, who found him in Abbottabad, but the majority of CIA believed he was another part of Pakistan in Chitral. Now, those people would say he's in Chitral. Yeah. They're wrong, but they believe it, right? So she ended up being right. A bunch of people fought against her. So you also have that problem where some people are just wrong, and they're not evolving or changing their assessment with time, and they just kind of stay stuck in it. And we have that huge problem, as you can imagine, with terrorists, because a lot of people were in Afghanistan, they were in Iraq, and they knew Al-Qaeda and ISIS at that moment in time. They do not know 2026 Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Qaeda and ISIS literally are having joint meetings in person. Now, you say that to people and they're like, they fight. It's like, no, you're giving me an assessment from 15 years ago. And so I think that's another piece of it. We left Afghanistan. We pretty much left most of Iraq. We handed Syria over to a terrorist. Our intel collection is horrible. And so people are making assessments off of old info or bad info. And then how do you blame them for that? That's a complicated thing. If you have bad info and you're a leader and you made the decisions off the bad info, then whose fault is it? And it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is, because I could see you being the most well-intentioned person, and you're putting out the info that you have is factual info, but it was either misled or misinformed, or they did it on purpose. They just put bad info out there so people can start gravitating toward that when the other info.
You have to think about how we collect our info in those regions now as well. So remember, when we left Afghanistan, we lost 80% of our ability to collect in that country on the ground. So now relying on SIGINT and things like that, which isn't as accurate or needs to be fused together with human, and we no longer have that capability. So when it comes to that region, where do we get our information from? Well, we get it from the Taliban.
Yeah.
Well, the Taliban's intermarried with terrorists, in the Haqqani network, who are also terrorists. So now we're getting our information directly from the people who are trying to harm us. Yeah. So it's not a conspiracy. It really is misinformation and then a little bit of incompetence.
Yeah. And then you add ego in there, and in the different branches of the federal government, it just gets convoluted and difficult. The ISIS and Al-Qaeda joining forces, it's kind of like that, that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We'll fight later, but right now, that's the bigger enemy, so let's go get them. And that's terrifying. So Boon, you've trained and briefed first responders on this, drawing from holding the line outnumbered. How can under-resourced officers adapt high-threat tactics, cover use, fire coordination, entry smarts to handle swatting or disguised terror ops without unnecessary risk to themselves or the communities?
So to really simplify it, a guy hiding in a room with a firearm trying to kill you is a guy hiding in a room with a firearm trying to kill you. So whether it's an inspired terrorist or it's a hardened Al-Qaeda fighter or it's just a crackhead, from the hood trying to hurt, the threat's the same to you. So the way you respond or the way you train doesn't have to be specific to terrorism or narcotics. It's making a tactically sound decision. So we already do active shooter training. So like Sarah mentioned before, just build upon that active shooter training. Do what you're already doing, what you already know. Now just make it more complicated. Add another shooter or add multiple shooters. Add multiple shooters at multiple locations. Increase the complexity by adding explosives. Increase the complexity by adding an attack or response and then another attack. Make sure that officers are actually trained in the hard skills that they need to survive. Push down what we would consider special tactics to patrol. Yeah. Patrol needs to know how to enter a building tactically sound, just like SWAT does. Or a narcotics unit or, some type of warrant service unit does as well. It shouldn't be exclusive to the special guys or the special teams. Medical. Everyone should know massive hemorrhage, how to stop massive hemorrhage. Bare minimum, everyone should take a stop the bleed course. Yeah. Have the IFAKs on their body, not just in the squad car to where they can actually get to them. And then at the end of the day, just basics. Basics you learn in the academy, we have to build on them. Do you understand the difference between cover, concealment, and deflection? Can you shoot, move, and communicate? When I say shoot, I'm not saying you actually have to shoot everything, but can you move in a tactically sound manner with a firearm? But do that and connect in concert with multiple officers that you might not train with every day. And that's the foundation of it right there.
Absolutely. No, that's great information. And I want to jump to something, the New York incident that we had where those two kids, they look like young kids. I hear now there's reports, from very well-to-do families, good money, nice houses. Mm-hmm. I saw the one doing the wannabe, whatever ISIS or whatever terror organizations kind of shout out thing. Do you think that was a coordinated, obviously between those two, but like a terror organization got with them is like, hey, I want you to do this at this day at this time because this is happening? Or do you just think it was sympathizers or just two knucklehead, stupid kids who idolize terrorists saying that we're going to do this because there's an anti-terrorist or anti-Muslim rally going on, so let's bomb these guys? Where do you think that attack came from?
As of now, it looks inspired, but we have heard this weird thing, like at least one or maybe both traveled to the Middle East, so I don't want to assume they didn't go through a training course. We still don't even have answers if Shamsuddin Jabbar, when he went to Egypt, if he went to one of the training courses, because honestly, a lot of terrorists will be traveling to Cairo and then they pop over into Libya, take terrorist training, and come back out. So we don't know yet if they were trained as, let's assume they weren't. It looks inspired. Their bomb design is what you can get online. It's a very simple thing. It's long been in Inspire, but also ISIS has put it out in its 2 publications. So it looks like the normal homemade devices. One of the things, though, the terrorists are innovating. And what we saw from this incident, and Al-Qaeda did a lot of lessons learned on this, and they realized they always failed for two main reasons. One is they didn't make the bombs correctly, or two, there's loose lips. And so there's a whole bunch of training on that piece. So with the bombs, that's really interesting. So they, at least in Al-Qaeda, started making bomb training mandatory. So they don't say, here's the directions.
Bomb guy.
Yeah, make it in your mom's kitchen. They say, you need to come to training. The interesting thing is when they had them come to training, they said, you still suck at this. So the interesting thing is some of Al-Qaeda's bombs are now being made in laboratories. So they make some officially in laboratories overseas and ship them here, and some they have laboratories on U.S. soil where they're making them and they're more controlled. There is a bomb technician involved. So it's a very interesting thing. Another thing that's really important to understand, because we have to talk about evolutions in bombs when they are starting to put chemicals in them. Now, if you're in law enforcement, Louisiana is a great example because there's a ton of these cells there. Now, if you're in Louisiana, right, and let's say one of these bombs is made in a bomb lab in Louisiana, and then let's say someone sets it off again on Bourbon Street. Now, it might have a chemical in it and be a hazmat situation. Was law enforcement preparing that if an ID blows up, there's these caustic chemicals? We don't see that happening. The other issue we're seeing is there is this belief by both Al-Qaeda and ISIS, hey, we need to make the U.S. feel a little more like we feel overseas. They have not been impacted by suicide attackers like they should be. So there is going to be the start of suicide bombings in the United States, which doesn't exist, and a lot of law enforcement have no SOPs for dealing with suicide bombers, and so we spend a lot of time, and he helps train people on how to do that, because you have to handle it very, very differently, and so it's another thing we want to push out there. Terrorists are innovating. You have to know what little things they're doing, or you have no plan for it. So if two suicide bombers go off, you never made a plan for it. Now you're in a difficult spot when, hey, we can make a plan today. If it happens, we know what we're going to do.
Yeah. Their training, their tactics, and all that stuff is always evolving and always getting better and better. And we're just always reactive, what I feel, to like the last 5 years. 5 years ago tactics, not up-to-date tactics. So like you said, you could be trained on how to deal with X, but now they're bringing Y and Z to the table, and you've never seen that before. Now you're just sitting there confused. The chemical thing is terrifying,
Right.
because what do you do when you have a mass casualty event? You rush in there, you perform aid, but now you're going down and you can't do any of that because there's a chemical there. And now, if you do know it's a chemical there, you're just watching those people suffer because you can't enter in that area.
Right.
Or even your response, not only do you need like a render safe, now you have a hazmat issue as well. Just wanted to jump on something that Sarah said earlier to your question of inspired versus like a cell. Something for law enforcement to remember is tactically the response isn't going to be much different whether it's inspired or it's a cell. The difference will be the investigation afterwards. Are there other cells or indicators that I can see to identify other cells? So it's kind of getting that network. So the investigation is very important so we don't gloss over or close that case too soon and we miss other indicators that might point to a bigger cell.
And I do want to, can I jump on that quick? So the greatest example again of this is the New Orleans attack. So Shamsuddin Jabbar was not a lone wolf. He was ISIS and he was in a cell. Now think about it. There was no investigation done into his cell. So his cell is still in Louisiana and they're still going to carry out attacks, and we just lost 14, 15 months going after his cell, and now the people of Louisiana are under this extra threat. So as local law enforcement too, you can't just take this first off assumption somebody is inspired. Because when we did our own investigation of Shamsuddin Jabbar, it's crazy. He took his direction straight from the military commission head of ISIL, Abdullah Maki. And the interesting thing is Abdullah Maki was so important the US government bombed him in March. So he's gone. He's that important that we did an operation to take him out. But he's not important enough for us to see what other terrorists he was directing in the United States. Like, it's a huge problem. And another problem is a lot of people are like, well, FBI's got it covered. Well, that's not true. And
We know that.
but it's an excuse, because then you're not doing the work yourself locally to figure out who's he connected to, where has he been going, who's he been talking to, has he been going to a safe house, has he been going to something that could be where they're storing weapons and stuff. That there was a little bit of that in his case, but not big enough. And as you know, he came to Tampa for 3 days. Again, a lot of people have a lot of questions still about that. So I find that very frustrating, because with him, we could have literally probably wrapped up a dozen terrorists. And now we have a dozen terrorists who are a threat. But remember, they were worried we were going to wrap up those terrorists. So then they got new recruits and added new bodies. So they even made the cells bigger while we were incompetent and didn't go after them.
Yeah, so to just think that everyone, and that's why I asked about the New York one, is it a lone wolf or is it a sympathizer? I think investigating it too. Who is this person related to? How did they get to be this? If they are a lone wolf, how? Like, what do they see? Who do they talk to? Because if they talk to somebody, did they get trained by somebody?
Is he recruiting?
Part of a group? Yeah. And now, like what you just mentioned, seems like that entire group added a dozen new faces. So the faces that you could have known and identified, now you have a dozen more to try to figure out.
Exactly.
Yeah, now I see why a lot of your podcast hosts or guests get frustrated with all this. It is very, very frustrating. Like, why aren't we doing anything about this? So, Sarah, with Taliban and Al-Qaeda funding and Iran and Russia angles fueling these threats, plus sleeper cells via borders, what concrete steps should leaders take, like better intel sharing or training budgets to better equip and protect Leo families facing these spillover risk daily? And we've talked about a lot of that already, but if you could add to that.
Well, as you know, anytime you have a weak point, enemies will take advantage of it. So, of course, we're in a situation right now where the easiest way to take advantage of us is cyber attacks, right? Because obviously Russia does it, China does it, Iran does it. So it's one thing just to keep in mind, like, are we protected enough? Do we have a plan if this occurs, etc.? Then everybody's concerned about sleepers. Again, it's not like some bat signal goes in the air and it activates people. But what we have to be honest about is the majority of a sleeper cell is logistic side. So there is a trail of them renting locations, purchasing things, traveling, recruiting, financing. Like, what ways can we think about this on a local level and get ahead of it? And then the last piece is, I don't love just saying prepare for a terrorist attack. If you prepare for a hurricane or any sort of crisis or natural disaster, just take lessons learned from up in the Carolinas and say, if this happened here, how would we handle it? Are we ready? Because simple things should happen. Like, the blood banks should be high. We should have the food banks fully stocked at all times. You should have a week's worth of food. We should make sure the community is taking Stop the Bleed. And those things are so simple. Like, if you're law enforcement, host these community events, because the more resilient you can make your community, even if something bad happens, they'll weather it. That's why in Florida, if a hurricane's coming, everyone goes and buys margarita mix, because they're prepared. They're not worried because they have everything in place and they're ready to go. And that's what I like to focus more on. Let's just make people resilient, and then they can handle kind of the shock if something happens.
Absolutely. And they can become part of that, see something, say something
Yep.
type of thing. Where it's not just your neighborhood crazy person or Karen, complaining about, everything, but it's like, ooh, I was trained or taught or read or saw something that I should mention this too.
Right.
It just expands that network of people with eyes out there within the community.
Yeah, like when I got my casing in my neighborhood, I knew exactly what it was right away. But people might not know. So it also is, the more you learn and understand and see things and understand things and realize, wait, this isn't normal in my neighborhood. Those two men don't look like anyone in my neighborhood. Heck, there's a guy in military fatigues and he's a foreigner in my neighborhood. So you know what I mean? It's like you have to put yourself in another mindset to even just start looking for those type of things and not feel like you're doing something wrong. I think a lot of people get scared, oh, if I provide a tip and it was wrong, like I did something bad or I could be racist or looked at bad. No, you're giving a tip to law enforcement who are wiser, they have more info, they can run something down. That's just to give them a look into something. Then it's up to them to decide is this something nefarious or not? And I think people put a lot of onus on themselves. Like, I have to have the whole thing solved if I give a tip. No, if something feels off, provide it to law enforcement and let them then do their job.
Yeah, for sure. And I can see, communities doing that. The worry of, oh, am I going to get painted as the racist, the bigot, or the this, the that, whatever word is being used for the day. But like you said, it's important. You know your community better than people outside of your community. My wife thinks I'm weird sometimes because I'll see a car that's slowly creeping the neighborhood, and we have things now like Uber Eats and Amazon uses personal cars, and so I'm just watching them. And if that car doesn't, or people looking at homes for sale, if you see a car that just goes and does a lap, does another lap, and they're not staring at their phone trying to figure out where their Uber Eats delivery is. I'm trying to get a tag. I'm trying to see who's in that car.
We're behind them. Even if we have to jump in our e-bikes.
Yeah, I've jumped in my truck before. Like, well, I'm just gonna get a peek into this car and see, is it a military-age male who's, got some binos in, or is it grandma trying to find, grandson's new home that he moved into? You don't want to feel like a conspiracy theorist or the crazy person, but I'd rather have more information and less information, and overthink something instead of that's nothing, and God forbid something then happens, because regret's going to get you for sure.
Have to do your due diligence.
For sure.
And it makes a whole community safer if people are paying attention, if they're asking, do you need help? Where are you going? Because it's even going to make regular criminals not want to come into that neighborhood. It's a common thing.
Correct.
That's why neighborhood watches in the past worked so well. And it'd be nice if we brought something similar.
Yeah, if they know that every time I enter this freaking neighborhood, I get a cop to pull me over because I shouldn't be here. Maybe it's some, teenage boy trying to visit his girlfriend at 2 o'clock in the morning so dad don't find out. But good for neighborhood watches for sure. Boon, family impacts from high-risk ops like Benghazi hit hard, I'm sure. How has that shaped your thoughts on supporting officers' families? We talked earlier about mental health resources, worst-case training, or community partnerships to bridge gaps where the federal backup really isn't there.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't bravado or anything like that, but for us, all of us, when I say us, I mean the whole group, Tonto Tig, all those guys, it wasn't such an impact because we have such a good support network. I mean, obviously, Benghazi was tragic, but that wasn't the first time we faced adversity. So we've been through these things before. We had systems in place, support systems, and that's extremely important to have. And I'm sure just like through the PBA, there's plenty of mental health resources that are available for officers. But those things have to be available beforehand, before tragedy happens. And being law enforcement, I mean, it can happen every day, You go out on patrol, something traumatic can happen. So those things need to be dealt with beforehand, not after the fact. And there's a bunch. I'm not, too savvy on what's available for law enforcement in, the Tampa Bay area, but I'm sure there's a lot of resources that are available. But again, that's something that should be provided by the agency, or the individual officer takes responsibility and his family and seeks that out ahead of time and has those in place.
Yeah, being linked with a network of people that help build that community, outside of work. I think it's vital, to have that community in work, right? Because those are your brothers and sisters that you're going to bleed with and sweat with and God forbid, die with. But those are your people. But outside of work, you need to have a good, sense of community with friends, with family, with support groups, your church, whatever the case may be.
Sure.
Faith-based, absolutely. We're huge on that. And we're huge on the mental health space. We created our own program for mental health for peer-to-peer officers. We partnered locally and federally with an ETMS program. It's like a mapping of your brain that gets the way that your cells sync, and we get them back in sync to help with sleep deprivation. People who just can't sleep or addicted to opioids because of past injuries, and it's life-saving. It's changing lives for sure. We just need to get it out there and not only say, hey, this resource is here for you once you get there. Like, we don't want people to even get there. Like, we want people to know that this is there and start working on it. Jiu-jitsu, faith-based, your community, before you get in that dark spot and you're put there and the liquor's talking to you now, and now you take an action that you can't recall that bullet once it's sent.
You bring up a good point of the preventive measures, and there's something that I've been looking into because it's affected a lot of my coworkers, but I'm not really smart to talk about it, but I can mention it. So there's something called like operator syndrome. And what it is, it's being in those high stress environments to where your fight or flight, your cortisol levels and adrenaline, things like that, are so high all the time. That's your baseline. It becomes normal. And the things it does to your body physiologically, not only psychologically over time, changes your chemical makeup. And it comes with a lot of adverse health effects that we don't realize. So you might be in law enforcement for 5 years and you're like, yeah, I got this. 10, 15 years. So you're all messed up and you don't know why. But a lot of it goes back to being in that elevated stress environment and not having a way to deal with it. So like you said, just getting ahead of that, having a good coping mechanism, but that healthy lifestyle, that camaraderie of a jiu-jitsu club or whatever it is, but just having that community, like you're saying, beforehand, before a crisis or before your health gets so bad, you're trying to treat symptoms instead of trying to prevent from being in that situation in the first place.
Yeah, we see a lot of these guys and girls that come from, prior military who have been able to compartmentalize everything they saw. I lost 17, people within my battalion brigade that were lost while we were over there. And I could understand that. Didn't make it any less tragic, right? We're at war, IEDs, RPGs, grenades, small arms fire, sniper fire. That stuff happens. And I went into that knowing that was something that I'm going to see. So like it wasn't a shock when it happened. Terrible, terrifying, horrific for the families left behind. But we lost 11 people to suicide, and that was mind-boggling to me. And I was like, man, we spent these amount of years trying not to die. And then you come home and you feel that there's nothing that can help you and you take your life. It's almost like the enemy didn't get you there, but they were able to get you here,
right?
Back at home, which is horrible. Yeah, mental health is huge, like you said, faith-based, jiu-jitsu clubs, whatever you can to make sure you take care of yourself.
Being involved in each other's lives.
For sure, absolutely. And I think the biggest overall thing that they need to realize is that at some point, no matter how good you can compartmentalize what you see on a day-to-day basis, when you put that pistol belt on, you put that vest on, every single day is a deployment. I told a couple of the Navy SEAL guys who work on this ETMS program, over there, deployed, you put all your stuff on, you go out on mission, you get blown up, God forbid you lose a guy or a girl that's on a squad with you, you come back, you debrief, you're with one another and you can talk about what happened. Somebody of like mind who just saw and witnessed and felt and heard and smelled the same thing you did, it's easy to open up about that. But every day when I go to work, if I got to take a kid out of a drowning pool or see some devastating car accident that's damn near close to an IED, reaction with how bad bodies can be mangled in a bad car accident, I don't want to bring that home. I don't want to tell my wife, man, let me tell you about this little kid that I had to work on but was dead. And I knew he was dead, but their family was behind me and I had to act like, not acting, but I tried to resuscitate knowing that he's too far gone. You hold that over a 25 to 32 year career. At some point, something's going to break. And, I think dealing with that as it happens, preventatively or as it happens, is way better than just holding on to that and keeping your mouth shut.
And one thing is you have to also focus on what might be stopping someone from like bringing it forward and dealing with it. So when we were in the CIA, there was, we're holding a clearance. And if we go and say we might have mental health problems, will that affect my clearance? Will it affect my ability to have a weapon? So then that was a huge problem. So luckily former agency people put something together and they made an app and it's all anonymous. So you could come and talk how you want. But so find out those things that are those blockers that are stopping people and then find a solution to it that they're comfortable with. Because we don't want people also not going for help because, will this affect if I can use my weapon? We want you straight in the head so you can always use your weapon just fine. So it's like figuring out those things and solving them.
Yeah, it's fitness for duty. That's what it's called in law enforcement world. You have to get a fitness for duty evaluation. Everybody's terrified. They're going to take my badge, they're going to take my gun, I'm not going to go to work.
So mental.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It is terrifying. We got the last two questions here and we'll wrap up. So Sarah, you've pushed for prosecuting swatting as terrorism and rethinking responses. From your high stakes hunts, what message do you have for our 1,900 plus PBA voters and community leaders on demanding real accountability, like forcing FBI action or bolstering law enforcement readiness to keep domestic terrorism off of our streets and out of our communities? Yeah.
Well, first, when we just talk about like a basic accountability, I feel like we have a lot of good laws and we don't use them anymore. So after 9/11, we put a lot of terrorism laws in place, and I don't think even a lot of law enforcement understands them. So they think, oh, we have to wait till someone does something till we can charge them. That's not true at all. We have a law that if you were in a terrorist camp overseas, we can charge you. We have a law, if you sent $10 to Hezbollah, we can charge you. So I do think, too, we need to get people to understand the law better so we don't get a lot of excuses, well, we can't do something about this. So that's one issue. The other issue is when we do things, they have to matter, right? So we have this whole problem where we detain thousands of terrorists over the years and they're all free, because we had no end game. So you also, if you're going to make a plan and you're going to do something, you're going to tackle something, let's just say we're going to tackle the cartels in our county, right? Well, then how are you going to charge them? How long are they going to be held? What's that look like? What's the long-term plan? Because the federal government never makes a long-term plan. They make a 1 or 2 year plan, and then we get stuck in all these messes, right? And so you have to at least think something through long-term if you want to say, we're going to put some justice in place. Well, what does that look like? What's the end goal? And then work back from it and do it the right way.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be administration to administration, or like you said, a 1 or 2 year plan. Who's Secretary of State or SecDef, and it's just their idea for that little part, point in time, the AG or whatever. It should be a long term. What are we going to do? How are we going to get them? Once we get them, what are we going to do? And what's the end game to that, for sure? Because the worst thing that a cop hates, and I can tell you this, and I know you probably hate it from being a cop, is, for example, arresting a doper, and a week later, like, why the hell are you back on the street? Why am I arresting you again? And now you got a gun on you, and now you fled, and now you crashed, and why are we dealing with this same repeat stuff over and over and over? That's huge.
It's insanity.
It is. It's truly insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result in it, and it doesn't happen. So justice system, tighten up. Boon, wrapping it up, for active officers and families listening, what's your bottom line takeaway on these homeland threats right now? And one thing they can do themselves, personal readiness, neighborhood networks, like we talked about, neighborhood groups, and pushing for policy to make sure local badges aren't left hanging like in Benghazi.
Yeah, well, I think there's multiple issues there, but definitely education. Educating and then believing that, hey, this isn't an overseas problem. This can actually be a problem in my community that I might have to deal with on patrol. So the education, and then taking individual responsibility. We brought up several times that the bar in law enforcement for the standard is extremely low, especially when it comes to hard skills that hopefully we don't have to use, but we might. So taking individual responsibility for your own training. All right, so agency won't pay for it, I'm not going to do it. Oh, I'm not on the clock, I'm not going. No. You chose a profession that requires a very high level of discipline and training, not just in firearms and combatives, but report writing, driving, interacting, interpersonal relations, interacting with people. But when it comes to those hard skills, you have to take it upon yourself to get that training and maintain that skill set, whether your agency pays for it or not. So if that means you're putting some money aside so you can, dedicate more time to firearms training or combatives training or whatever it is, then you have to take that personal discipline and make sure that you do it. And same thing with your family. Make sure that your family is prepared and taken care of. I know we don't want to think about it, but do you have a will? Because you very well could kiss your wife and kids goodbye in the morning and not come home that night. Are they taken care of? Does your wife or, your husband, whatever your situation is, do they know how to function without you? So in a crisis, like Sarah always mentions, make an emergency action plan and take yourself out of it. Now, can your family get by and do what they need to do without you being there, without you being the leader? So just make sure that your family is taken care of physically and mentally, and then just take individual responsibility to make sure that you're trained as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always say, and this being a first responder, when the shit hits the fan, we're out of the picture. We're going to get recalled. We're going to get called in. Hurricanes. I'm not there with my wife and my son when a hurricane comes in. I'm at the agency. Anything. God forbid, a terrorist attack happens. We're going to get recalled in. So now your family, who if only ever trained or only ever planned to have you in that picture, is facing those circumstances. They're like, what do we do now? Like, whose role is what now at this point? And I love your point about the wills. So PBA members, free wills, free trust, through our organization. So if you're a PBA member, we do free wills and trusts with one of our partner attorneys, and that's vital. I can tell you, and I won't name names, but we had an officer killed in line of duty, and their wife was like, I don't know how to pay the bills. Like, he did all of this. Had another one. Their last beneficiary packet was not the current wife, but the ex-wife. So now we're like, oh Lord, like, how do we broach this now? Like, how do we deal with that? Think about that dynamic. Is terrifying. So keep your stuff up to date, free wills and trust, and make sure that you get that squared away. But planning for yourself, that training thing is huge. Canine training is expensive. To host, different organizations or entities or people to come do that canine training at your place or go to their place. It's hard to find it in the same state. That can get really expensive. So we go to training and volunteer our own money, our own time to go do that over a weekend because it's high quality training that the agency may not be able to afford, or we're a large unit. We have 14, handlers on there. You can't send all 14. So it's train to trainer. We'll send the trainers to it and the trainers come back and train the guys. I want to give you guys the opportunity on the floor for however long you want to talk about anything you guys got going, any podcast stuff you guys got going, any books you got going, anything you want to promote or push out there that is beneficial for you, our members, or anybody to pay attention to and look out for. So,
yeah. It's not my book, but me and like 19 other people contributed to it. It's called The Gathering Storm. You can get it on Amazon. And it was put together by Scott Mann. I don't know if you know him. He's a retired Green Beret that lives in Tampa. He wrote like Nobody's Coming to Save You, Operation Pineapple Express. Very big in our community and does a lot of humanitarian work. And he actually wrote this. So if you don't know how to get started to prepare for an emergency like a terrorist attack, you can pick it up. So I could pick it up if I just want to prepare for my family. You could pick it up if you want to prepare your unit. If you're a businessman, you want to be like, how do I prepare as a company? And it just walks you through the questions you should be asking yourself and then how to answer. It's very simple, like a 100-page paperback. So that's a really great resource I like to bring up. Obviously, everyone in law enforcement should at least read the memo NCTC put out about AQ's homeland plot. And then last week, ATF put out a piece about Al-Qaeda's plotting too. So if you guys don't have a copy of that, you should get it, and I can get it to you if you want. So just also some of those things that go out, but somehow they don't get filtered, right? So it's kind of like we need to be on top of this. Another really good thing if you're in law enforcement is it's strange. Al-Qaeda puts videos on the internet, and then the federal government takes them down within a half hour, but then law enforcement never sees it. So there are two really important videos. There's the video, it was from December 2023. It's when Al-Qaeda first kind of shows that they're going to do a homeland attack again, and then they showcase the aviation plot. And then they did a new video because their leader was killed in AQAP, and so now I got to show off the new guy. And they did a new video again in June, but the good part is the first one has a lot of bomb making stuff in it. The second one also has some interesting things that, if you pay attention to look at it. So they're just really good things to be looking at just to see at least what the terrorists are putting out there. Sometimes what they're trying to tell you too, because there's ruses in there. So it's just, it's something to always learn from, and I think it's super important. And then today on the watch floor, I am putting out an episode on Al-Qaeda's aviation plot, because we spend a lot of time talking about what's going to happen in the community, but the question we get the most of, because I think you can plan for your home and you feel you can control if something happens at home. People have a lot more questions. Hey, I'm going to get on a plane. My kids are going to go on a school trip. And they have a lot more questions about the aviation piece because they don't control that piece. So I do explain it, on the podcast today. But, anyone can always reach out to us too. We're always answering stuff, putting it on. I put it on my social media, just Sarah Adams at X. A lot of different tips and tricks to like mentally prepare, or we like to do a lot on situational awareness. Because like I said, we really just want people, if you get in a tough spot, get out of it. Sure. That's our only, we don't want you to go, and normal people aren't going to probably take on the terrorists. We don't want you to. We just want you to get the heck out of the way.
Get off the X and let somebody know.
Exactly. And it's really what we try to push, and then have law enforcement be ready. Like, hey, this is a different beast. Even if you served in Afghanistan, this is not what you saw before. Iraq's a little different. If you're in a Fallujah or Ramadi, you're set. But the crazy part is So I go all around the country and do briefings, and there'll be like 200 or 300 law enforcement in the room. There'll be like police chiefs or, the sheriff or whatever. And I'll say who served in Iraq or Afghanistan. We're getting to where it's like 2 to 5 people raise their hand, because all of them now, law enforcement's 20 years. So a lot of them have moved out. So we're also making an assumption people understand terrorism like you do who served, and that's actually not true at all. Some of them don't know even just the basics. So it's also getting back to those basics and just explaining people, here's what I saw. Like, hold a seminar and say, here's what I saw in Iraq. Here were the tactics, the techniques. Here's what we did against them. Here's what we learned, because that is super, super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got a great community of law enforcement officers here that did serve in Iraq or Afghanistan, but not only that, the retirees that we have in this area from the SOF community, we're great friends with the horse soldier guys.
Yep.
I know that's going back a while, but man, Scott Neal and Mark Nudge and all those guys Bob Pennington, they're awesome. They're great friends. We hang out with them at the Urban Stillhouse in St. Pete. So real good guys that they'd love to get asked questions about, what they did, saw and heard. But like you said, sometimes it progresses, like the training and tactics change. So the recent people are, like you said, are probably vital to tap into. Anything for you?
I'd just like to let all law enforcement know, to include the FBI, that we do appreciate their efforts. And, when people say, hey, did you serve? Well, law enforcement's serving as well. Yeah. So I do personally appreciate that. I don't really self-promote, so I'll just say, hey, watch Sarah Adams on the watch floor.
Absolutely.
If you want to train with Boon, though, he's on shootingclasses.com.
Okay. And you got courses that you go teach?
I do.
Yep.
Shootingclasses.com.
Yeah, it's actually a website.
Shootingclasses.com.
Wherever you live, it's a website you can go to actually find firearms instructors. So he's one of many on it, but if you're looking for his classes, then you can just type, Dave Benton and pull his up. But if you're looking for classes and other topics, you can pull those up too. So it's actually just a great resource all around.
Yeah, wealth of knowledge, John. What a resource to have, especially for the law enforcement community. So I appreciate you doing that. I know a lot of guys, after they punch that clock, they're like, I'm done. No more of this. So I appreciate you staying in the fight and, dealing with some of these young knuckleheads in law enforcement and help training them and get squared away. Can't thank you guys enough. Thank you for your time. I know it's going to be beneficial and help out for our local law enforcement and help keep our community safer, which is just what we're trying to do. Find any way we can keep our officer members mentally healthy, physically healthy, and I think this is a little bit of all of that. Safer community, safer officers, more mentally healthy. So I appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.